You know what? Bradley Hearst said loud enough for the entire lobby to hear. I've seen a lot of people walk through that door, but I have never seen a black homeless woman try to open an account at a bank like this with a crumpled $10 bill. He plucked the bill from Vanessa Cole's fingers before she could set it down, held it up, let everyone see it. Then he tore it in half. A teller named Tanya covered her mouth, not in horror and laughter. She caught herself, looked down at her keyboard, and said nothing. The man standing behind Vanessa in line exhaled loudly. Can we move this along? Some of us have actual business here. Nobody told him to be quiet. Bradley leaned forward and pressed both torn pieces into Vanessa's open palm, the way you'd return something dirty. Here, that's probably still more than you're worth. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. And Vanessa Cole did not cry. She reached into her plastic bag slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a single document. The man who had just destroyed her $10 had no idea his own name was nowhere on the cornerstone above his head. But hers was. Drop a comment right now. Where in the world are you watching? And what time is it there? I read every single one. And if you're not subscribed yet, do it before the next part, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about this story. Crestwood Community Bank sat on the corner of Delmar Boulevard and 5th Street in the kind of neighborhood that real estate brochures had recently started calling emerging. The old barbershop next door was gone. The Caribbean restaurant that had fed 3 generations of families was gone. In their place stood a smoothie bar and a co-working space with exposed brick and pendant lighting. But the bank itself remained, its glass facade scrubbed clean, its original brass lettering replaced with sleek chrome, its lobby redesigned to feel less like a neighborhood institution and more like a corporate showroom. If you looked closely at the cornerstone near the main entrance, you could still see it. Chiseled into the stone in plain block letters slightly worn by 27 years of weather. Crestwood Community Bank, Estau. 1997, J. and V. Cole. Most employees walked past it every day without reading it. Bradley Hearst had never read it once. He had transferred to this branch 2 years ago from a downtown corporate location, brought in by the new board to modernize operations and optimize client acquisition. Those were the words in his performance review. What they meant in practice was simpler. Push out the old clientele, attract wealthier ones, and don't ask too many questions about how the transition happened. Bradley was very good at not asking questions. He was even better at making people feel small. He was 38 years old, wore the same brand of Italian loafers every day, and had a habit of straightening his tie whenever he was about to say something cruel, as though cruelty required a certain formality. Vanessa Cole was 54. She had founded this bank with her husband James in the spring of 1997, in a rented office on the 2nd floor of a building that no longer stood. They had started with $180,000 in seed capital, 11 community investors, and a mission statement that James had typed himself on an actual typewriter to serve those who have been told they are not worth serving. Those words were still on the wall inside, reframed, redesigned, printed in a modern sans serif font that made them look like a marketing slogan rather than a promise. But the words were still there. Vanessa had made sure of that during the years when she still had a say. James died in March of 2026, weeks into the pandemic, from a heart attack that the doctors said had nothing to do with the virus and everything to do with stress. He had spent the last year of his life watching the bank they built be quietly dismantled around them. He had spent the last month of his life fighting a civil lawsuit that Vanessa later discovered had been engineered by the bank's new legal team to drain their finances, freeze their assets, and create enough legal chaos to justify a forced restructuring of their founding shares. By the time Vanessa understood what had happened, James was gone. The lawsuit had cost her $340,000 in legal fees, and the shares had been transferred through a document she later realized she had signed at 11 o'clock at night, in a conference room, exhausted and grieving, told by 3 lawyers that it was a routine administrative filing. She lost the house 8 months ago, a 4-bedroom on Crescent Street that she and James had bought in 2003, where Iris had grown up, where the kitchen still smelled like the Sunday breakfasts James used to make. She packed what she could into 2 bags and moved into the East Side Women's Shelter on Morrison Avenue, into a room she shared with 2 other women, with a single window that faced a parking lot. She had not been idle. The plastic bag she carried that morning contained 6 manila folders, each one labeled in her careful handwriting. 4 years of documentation. Loan denial letters sorted by zip code. Demographic maps she had obtained through public records requests. Internal emails forwarded to her by former employees who had watched what was happening and felt sick about it. A spreadsheet cross-referencing foreclosure rates with census data, neighborhood by neighborhood, block by block. And at the bottom of the bag, wrapped in a plastic sleeve, a copy of the original founding charter with specific clauses highlighted in yellow. She had not come to the bank that morning out of desperation. She had come because the time was right. She had dressed carefully. The coat was worn, she didn't own a better one, but her posture was not. She walked through the glass doors of Crestwood Community Bank at 10:14 on a Tuesday morning, took her place in line, and waited with the patience of someone who had been waiting for 4 years and knew exactly what she was waiting for. The lobby was busy. A security guard named Deshaun Porter stood near the entrance, his arms folded loosely, his eyes moving across the room in the practiced way of someone who had learned to see everything without appearing to watch anyone. He noticed Vanessa when she walked in. He noticed the coat. He noticed the plastic bag. He also noticed the way she stood straight-backed, unhurried, like someone who had every right to be exactly where she was. Tanya Mills was behind the teller counter processing a transaction for an elderly man with a hearing aid. She glanced up when Vanessa reached the front of the line and felt the familiar pull of discomfort that she had learned over 2 years of working here to swallow quickly and ignore. Bradley Hurst emerged from his office at 10:21. He took one look at Vanessa and straightened his tie. What followed lasted less than 4 minutes. It felt longer. Bradley's voice carried across the entire lobby. The torn pieces of the $10 bill fluttered to the floor. The man behind Vanessa sighed impatiently. Tanya laughed and looked away. Deshaun took one step forward, then stopped, his jaw tight. When it was over, when Vanessa had been guided firmly toward the exit by Deshaun's reluctant hand on her elbow, she paused at the door. She looked back at the lobby, at the chrome fixtures and the marble floors, and the mission statement on the wall in its modern sans serif font. Then she looked at the cornerstone. J. and V. Cole. She walked out into the morning sun, sat down on the low concrete wall outside the entrance, opened her plastic bag, and began to wait for the video to find the right person. She didn't have to wait long. Before Deshaun's hand had even reached her elbow, Vanessa had already reached into her plastic bag. She did it slowly, without panic, without the trembling hands of someone caught off guard. She moved like a person who had rehearsed this moment, not because she was performing, but because she had genuinely imagined it, planned for it, and decided exactly what she would do when it arrived. She placed a single document on the counter. It was a photocopy of the original bank charter dated April 14, 1997. The first page. At the bottom, 2 signatures, James A. Cole and Vanessa R. Cole. Below the signatures, notarized and sealed, a line that read, Co-founders and majority shareholders, Crestwood Community Bank, N.A. Bradley glanced at it the way you glance at a flyer someone shoves into your hand on the street, eyes skimming the surface, brain already dismissing it before comprehension arrived. Ma'am. His voice had dropped into what Vanessa privately called the management register, calm, condescending, wrapped in the performance of reasonableness. I don't know where you got this or who printed it for you, but this kind of thing isn't going to. Section 4, paragraph 2, Vanessa said. Her voice was quiet, not meek. Quiet the way deep water is quiet. Co-founder rights are non-transferable without a witnessed, notarized agreement filed with the State Banking Commission within 30 days of execution. That filing was never made. Bradley blinked. Behind him, Tanya had gone very still. I'd like to see the manager, Vanessa continued. I'd like to discuss the terms under which my founding shares were transferred, and I'd like that conversation documented. For approximately 2 seconds, the lobby was completely silent. Then Bradley laughed. It was a loud laugh, a performative laugh. The kind designed to signal to everyone watching that whatever was happening was not serious, was not a threat, was in fact a source of amusement. He turned slightly, making eye contact with a customer near the back of the line, an invitation to share the joke. A teenage girl near the window did not laugh. She was 17, waiting while her mother completed a transaction at the next window. Her name was Jalen, and she had her phone out before Bradley finished his first sentence. Her hands were shaking slightly, but the camera was steady. Those words on the plaque, Vanessa said, nodding toward the lobby wall where the mission statement hung in its modern frame. Do you know what they say? Bradley crossed his arms. To serve those who have been told they are not worth serving. She recited it without looking at the wall, word for word, comma for comma, exactly as James had typed it. I wrote that sentence. My husband typed it. We framed the original and hung it in the office on the second floor of a building that used to stand on this block before you people tore it down and put up a juice bar. Bradley's smile didn't disappear. It hardened, which was worse. Ma'am, he said, and the word had no warmth in it whatsoever. I am the manager, and I'm telling you clearly and professionally that whatever story you've constructed about your connection to this institution, I didn't construct anything, Vanessa said. I built it. Security. Bradley didn't look at Deshawn when he said it. He kept his eyes on Vanessa, his chin slightly raised. Please move this individual along. She's disrupting business. Deshawn Porter had been a security guard at Crestwood Community Bank for 3 years. He had a daughter in 7th grade, a car payment that was 2 weeks late, and a mother on a fixed income whose health insurance was tied to his employment benefits. He had seen Bradley do this before, not to someone with founding documents, but the mechanics were familiar. The dismissal, the performance, the way Bradley's voice carried just far enough to make sure every customer in the lobby understood exactly what was happening and exactly what kind of person was being removed. He hated this part of his job. He walked toward Vanessa slowly. Ma'am, he said softly, I'm going to have to ask you to step outside. Vanessa looked at him, not with anger, with something closer to recognition, the look of one person who understands what another person is being forced to do against their better judgment. I know, she said quietly. She gathered her document, placed it back in its folder, placed the folder back in the plastic bag. She picked up the 2 torn halves of her $10 bill from the counter where Bradley had deposited them, folded them neatly, and put them in her coat pocket. Then she turned toward the lobby wall one final time, not at the mission statement, at the cornerstone visible through the glass of the front window from where she stood. The stone, the chiseled letters, the names that had been there for 27 years and would be there long after Bradley Hearst moved on to whatever branch he destroyed next. J. and V. Cole, She walked toward the exit with Deshawn half a step behind her, and as she passed the spot where Jalen stood near the window, the teenage girl lowered her phone just slightly. Their eyes met for less than a second. Vanessa gave the smallest nod. Outside, the morning sun was warm. Vanessa sat back down on the low concrete wall, opened her bag, and pulled out a battered flip phone. She dialed a number she knew by memory. It rang twice. "Raymond," she said. "It happened. We're ready." She ended the call and looked back through the glass at the lobby, where Bradley Hurst was already straightening his tie and moving on to his next performance. He hadn't once looked at the cornerstone. Not once in 2 years. Inside, Jalen pressed upload. Iris Cole had not spoken to her mother in 4 years, 2 months, and 11 days. She knew the exact count, not because she was sentimental about it, but because she was a lawyer, and lawyers noted dates the way other people noted feelings, precisely defensively, with an awareness that the record might someday matter. She was 31 years old. She worked at Callaway and Marsh, a mid-sized firm in the financial district specializing in corporate litigation. She had a corner office on the 14th floor, a coffee order that the intern downstairs had memorized, and a carefully maintained professional reputation that she had built brick by careful brick, on the understanding that her last name carried weight, but only if no one looked too closely at what had happened to her family. The estrangement had begun in 2021, 6 months after her father died. It had not begun with a single argument, but with a slow accumulation of unbearable things: the lawsuit, the lost house, the frozen accounts, her mother's refusal to accept a bankruptcy filing that might have preserved something. Iris had watched Vanessa spend money they didn't have on document requests and public records filings and meetings with a civil rights attorney, who Iris had been certain at the time was offering false hope to a grieving woman. She had said things she could not unsay. Vanessa had said things back. And then the silence had simply continued, the way silences do when both people are too proud and too hurt to be the one who ends it. Iris had told herself in the years since that she had made the right decision. That distance was a form of self-preservation, that she could not save her mother from choices her mother had made. She had almost convinced herself. At 2:17 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, she was reviewing a contract brief when her phone began to buzz with notifications. She ignored the first 2. The third was a text from a law school colleague. "Is this your mother?" followed by a link. Iris clicked it. The video had 400,000 views. She watched it twice without moving. The second time, she turned her chair so her back was to the glass wall of her office and watched it again with the volume up. Bradley's voice. The torn bill. The laughter from behind the counter. The man in line exhaling impatiently. And her mother standing perfectly still, her plastic bag in her hand. Her posture so upright it looked almost formal, taking everything that was being done to her without flinching, without breaking, without giving anyone in that lobby the satisfaction of her collapse. Iris closed her laptop, sat for a moment with her hands flat on the desk. Then she picked up her coat, told the intern she had a family matter, and left. The drive to the East Side Women's Shelter took 22 minutes. She sat in the parking lot for 4 more, rehearsing in her head what she planned to say. The version of this conversation she had imagined in the rare moments over the past 4 years, when she had imagined it at all, had always begun with an accounting, a reckoning. Everything she had wanted to say about the bankruptcy filing, about the legal fees, about the choices that had led to a 4-bedroom house on Crescent Street being stripped away. She walked in. A woman at the front desk directed her down a narrow hallway to a common room at the back. Vanessa was sitting at a folding table by the window. In front of her, spread across the table in neat labeled rows, were 6 manila folders, a yellow legal pad covered in her handwriting, and a cup of tea that had gone cold. She was reading something, her reading glasses low on her nose, And she did not look like a woman who had been publicly humiliated 4 hours ago. She looked like a woman who was working. She looked up when Iris appeared in the doorway. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. "You saw it," Vanessa said finally. It wasn't a question. "Mom." Iris's voice came out smaller than she intended. "What is all of this?" Vanessa took off her reading glasses. "Sit down." Iris sat. She pulled the folder closest to her and opened it before Vanessa could say anything further. Lawyer's instinct, the need to understand the evidence before the argument. The first page was a loan denial letter. The second was another. The third was a map of the city printed from a public records database with denial rates marked by neighborhood in color-coded gradients. Red deepened in the east and south sides of the city, the same neighborhoods where the bank's original branches had been built. "How long?" Iris said, slowly turning pages. "Have you had this, 4 years, Vanessa said. "Since the day they took the bank." Iris looked up. "I didn't fall apart," Vanessa said, and her voice was steady and clear and carried no accusation in it, which somehow made it worse. "I know that's what you thought. I know that's why you left. But I was never falling apart, Iris. I was building a case." The folder in Iris's hands contained 37 loan denial letters. Each one had a sticky note attached in Vanessa's handwriting with the applicant's credit score, income level, and zip code. The pattern was not subtle once you saw it. It was not subtle at all. "There's more," Vanessa said. "The folder on the left has the internal emails, former employees. 3 of them sent me documents over the past 2 years. The middle folder has the foreclosure data cross-referenced with the bonus incentive structures." She paused. "Bradley Hurst's name appears 11 times in the incentive reports." Iris set down the folder, picked up the middle one. Dimanche. They filed a competency petition today," Vanessa added quietly. "Served this afternoon. They want to declare me mentally unfit, nullify everything before it sees a courtroom." Iris's jaw tightened. "That's Patricia Voss." "Yes. She did the same thing to Marcus Webb in 2019. "I know. I studied every case." Vanessa slid a business card across the table. "Gloria Marsh, Civil Rights and Financial Discrimination Law." "She's been watching this bank for 3 years. She's been waiting for something she could take into a courtroom." Iris picked up the card, turned it over. On the back in Vanessa's handwriting. "She's ready." "Call her," Vanessa said. "Tonight." Iris looked at her mother, really looked at her for the first time in 4 years, and saw not the broken woman she had spent 4 years telling herself she had escaped, but someone patient and precise and absolutely certain of what she was doing. She picked up her phone. Gloria Marsh answered on the first ring. "I know why you're calling," she said, before Iris got 3 words out. "Bring her, tonight." Gloria Marsh's office was on the 3rd floor of a building that had once been a community credit union. The original teller windows were still there, frosted over, and converted into bookshelves that sagged under the weight of case files and legal journals. A framed photograph hung above her desk, Gloria 30 years younger, standing on the steps of a federal courthouse, holding a document above her head like a trophy. The caption beneath it read, "First National Redlining, Case Overturned, 1994. She was 62 now. Her hair was silver, and she wore it natural, close-cropped, without apology. She had the kind of stillness that came not from calm, but from discipline, the practiced quiet of someone who had spent decades in rooms where losing your composure meant losing your case. She was already at her desk when Vanessa and Iris arrived at 8:47 in the evening. A legal pad sat in front of her, half filled with notes. She had apparently begun preparing before they knocked. "Sit," she said the same way Vanessa had said it to Iris 4 hours earlier. "Show me everything. Start from the beginning, and don't skip anything because you think it's too small. Vanessa opened her folders on Gloria's conference table and began. She started with the map. It was a city planning document obtained through a public records request filed 18 months ago. On its surface, it showed nothing more than loan approval rates by census tract. But when Vanessa overlaid it with a second map demographic data from the same census period, the pattern became impossible to dismiss. The neighborhoods with the highest concentrations of Black and Latino residents had denial rates between 61 and 74%. Comparable neighborhoods on the north and west sides of the city, with similar median incomes and credit profiles, had denial rates between 12 and 18%. Gloria studied both maps for a long time without speaking. "This alone won't win a case," she said finally, "but it establishes the pattern." What else? Vanessa produced the internal emails. There were 43 of them forwarded over the past 2 years by 3 former employees who had left the bank and felt, as one of them had written in her cover message, that staying silent made her complicit. The language in the emails was careful, corporate language always is, but the meaning was not hidden deeply enough. Neighborhood Repositioning Initiative Q3 targets attached. Risk recalibration parameters updated for Southern District portfolio. Equity harvest opportunities, see flagged accounts in attached spreadsheet. Iris picked up one email and read it twice. Her face did not change, but her hand tightened slightly around the paper. "Equity harvest," she said quietly. "They're describing foreclosures as a revenue strategy." "Read the attachment reference on that one," Vanessa said. Iris flipped to the next page. The attached spreadsheet listed 47 properties by address. Each one had a projected acquisition value, a current loan balance, and a column labeled Timeline to Default. The addresses were clustered in 4 zip codes. All 4 were in the red zones on Vanessa's map. Gloria made a note on her legal pad. Incentive structures. Vanessa produced a third folder. Bradley Hurst's name appeared in the incentive reports 11 times over 3 fiscal years. His performance bonuses were tied to a metric called portfolio efficiency, a term that cross-referenced with the foreclosure data, corresponded directly to the number of properties successfully acquired through default proceedings. The higher the acquisition count in his district, the higher his quarterly bonus. In the most recent fiscal year, that bonus had been $47,000. The room was very quiet. "They turned the bank into a machine," Vanessa said. "Not a bank that happened to discriminate. A machine specifically designed to strip equity from Black and Latino homeowners and transfer it upward." Gloria set down her pen. "And you built this bank." "My husband and I built this bank," Vanessa said, "to do the exact opposite of what it's doing now." Gloria looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "Tell me about the founding clause." Vanessa opened the charter copy. Section 4, paragraph 2 was highlighted in yellow. She read it aloud slowly, and as she did, Gloria wrote every word verbatim on her legal pad. Co-founder protection rights, the clause stated, were non-transferable without a witnessed and notarized agreement filed with the State Banking Commission within 30 days of execution. If that filing was not completed within the statutory window, any purported transfer was legally void, and the original co-founder retained full standing. "The filing was never made," Vanessa said. "I verified it through the State Commission's Public Records Archive 6 months ago. The transfer document exists. The Commission filing does not." Gloria tapped her pen against the legal pad. "They'll produce the transfer document and argue the filing is a procedural technicality. Then we argue the transfer document is a forgery," Iris said. Both women looked at her. "The night my mother signed that document," Iris continued, her voice precise and controlled. "She was 8 weeks into grieving my father. She had been awake for 19 hours, and she was in a conference room with 3 lawyers who told her it was routine. That's coercion at minimum. If the signature can be forensically examined, it can, Gloria said. I know a document examiner, Marcus Tate, best in the state. A knock at the office door interrupted them. Gloria's paralegal leaned in. Ms. Marsh, process server just called. The competency petition was filed this afternoon. Emergency hearing scheduled for Friday morning. Iris's jaw tightened. That's Patricia Voss moving fast. She always moves fast, Gloria said, standing. So do we. She looked at Vanessa. There's one more thing I need to know. The original physical records, founding documents, board minutes, original loan files. Where are they? Vanessa folded her hands on the table. There's a document vault, sub-basement level behind the old boiler room. I had it built in 2003. It was never included in the asset transfer documentation because it was listed as a maintenance storage area. She paused. I don't believe they know it exists. Gloria looked at her for a long moment. Then we need to get inside that building, she said. Before Friday, Iris looked at her mother across the table, and for the first time in 4 years, what she felt was not anger, not grief, not the complicated residue of estrangement. What she felt settling into her chest with quiet certainty was something that felt very much like hope. Her phone buzzed on the table, a text from an unknown number. She turned the screen so her mother could read it. This is Deshawn Porter. I work security at Crestwood. I need to talk to someone. Tonight, if possible. I saw what they did to Mrs. Cole, and I know things. Deshawn Porter arrived at Gloria Marsh's office at 10:23 that night, still in his security uniform. His name badge turned inward against his chest, as though he could make himself less identifiable by hiding 4 letters and a photograph. He was 34 years old. He had a daughter named Amara in 7th grade who wanted to be a marine biologist. He had a car payment that was 17 days late, and a mother on a fixed income whose health insurance, a fact Bradley Hurst had mentioned with careful casualness during a private conversation 3 weeks ago, was tied directly to Deshawn's continued employment. He sat in the chair across from Gloria's desk and clasped his hands together and did not speak for a moment. Then he said, "He called us into the break room this morning, me and 2 other guards. He had printed statements already written out, and he told us to sign them. Said they confirmed that the woman from the lobby had been aggressive and threatening, and that we had felt unsafe." He paused. She wasn't any of those things. She was the quietest person in that building. "Did you sign?" Gloria asked. "No. Did the others?" Deshawn looked at the table. "One did. The other said she needed to think about it." He exhaled. "Bradley told me directly, looking me in the eye, that my mother's insurance situation would be a real shame to complicate. Those were his exact words. A real shame to complicate." Iris's pen had not stopped moving since he sat down. "There's something else," Deshawn said. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a folded piece of paper, a printout of what appeared to be a system administration screen. "I have supervisor-level access to the bank's security archive system. Monica in IT gave me the codes last year when she was on medical leave. Nobody ever revoked them." He slid the paper across the desk. "The system backs up to an off-site server. Footage, metadata, everything. It goes back to 2019. Gloria unfolded the paper and studied it. Everything, conference rooms, executive offices, the lobby, the parking structure. He pointed to a line on the printout. "There's a metadata log that records every time the document scanner runs. Date, time, number of pages, which workstation." He looked at Vanessa. "The night you signed those papers, Mrs. Cole." "What date was that?" Vanessa didn't hesitate. "November 14th, 2020. Deshawn nodded slowly. "The log for that night shows 23 separate scan events. from 9:41 p.m. to 11:58 p.m., all from the conference room workstation. He paused to let that land. You said you signed 2 documents. The room went very still. 23 scans, Gloria said quietly. For 2 documents. They were practicing the signature, Iris said. Running copies until they had one that would hold up. Vanessa said nothing. She sat with her hands flat on the table and her eyes somewhere in the middle distance, and whatever she was feeling, she was keeping it below the surface for now. Raymond Okafor arrived 20 minutes later. He was 67, heavy-set, with reading glasses on a chain around his neck, and the deliberate movements of a man who had learned to be careful with everything he touched. He had been Vanessa and James's attorney for the first 12 years of the bank's existence, handling the founding documentation, the charter filings, the original board agreements. He had retired in 2012 and moved to a smaller practice in the suburbs. When Vanessa had called him at 11 p.m., he had answered before the second ring. He set a metal document case on the conference table and opened it. Inside in archival sleeves were copies of every founding document he had ever filed on behalf of the Coles. Charter, shareholder agreements, board resolutions, and at the bottom of the case in its own sleeve a copy of the sub-basement vault access protocol, including its physical location, described in maintenance records as Utility Storage Area C Boiler Room Adjacent Sub-Level 2. I kept everything, Raymond said simply. James asked me to. He said. He paused and something moved across his face. He said you never know when someone's going to try to rewrite the story. He reached into his coat pocket and produced a physical key. Old brass worn smooth attached to a tag that read SB-SL2-C in faded marker. Original vault access. I never returned it when I retired. Figured if the day came, someone would need it. Across town in his apartment on the 15th floor of a building that charged $4,200 a month in rent. Bradley Hearst was on a video call with Patricia Voss. Voss was 61, silver-haired, and wore reading glasses that she used primarily as a prop, something to remove and set on the desk when she wanted to signal that she was about to say something serious. She removed her glasses. The competency petition is filed, she said. The hearing is Friday. If we can get the judge to appoint a guardian, anything she says, any claim she makes, any document she presents becomes legally suspect. We don't need to win the argument. We just need to muddy it. And the granddaughter? Bradley asked. He had dropped the polished corporate register. His voice, without an audience, was flatter, harder. She's a lawyer at Callaway and Marsh. Find out if she has any disciplinary history, bar complaints, anything. Voss replaced her glasses. Everyone has something. You just have to know where to look. Back in Gloria's office, they worked until 4 a.m. Raymond organized the founding documents into a chronological evidence chain. Deshawn formatted the metadata logs into a readable report. Iris drafted the legal response to the competency petition. Gloria prepared the emergency motion to access the sub-basement vault under court authority. At one point, near 3 a.m., Vanessa stood and walked to the window. The city was quiet at that hour. The street below was empty except for a delivery truck idling at a red light. Iris came and stood beside her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Iris said quietly, "I'm sorry I left." Vanessa looked at her daughter. "I know." She put her hand over Iris's on the windowsill. "You're here now." At dawn, they gathered their materials. Raymond produced the brass key from his coat pocket and held it out to Vanessa. She took it and held it for a moment. The weight of it, the age of it, the fact that it had traveled 22 years through someone's careful keeping to arrive in her hand at exactly this moment. "This place forgot who built it," Raymond said. Vanessa closed her fingers around the key. "Then we remind them." The service entrance to Crestwood Community Bank was on the east side of the building, accessible from a narrow alley that smelled of damp concrete and old exhaust. At 6:09 in the morning, the alley was empty. The overnight cleaning crew had finished at 5:50. The morning security shift didn't begin until 6:30. Deshawn had confirmed the gap the night before from memory, with the precision of someone who had spent 3 years watching the building breathe. They moved quickly and without speaking. Vanessa Iris, Gloria Raymond, and Deshawn, 5 people who had not slept, carrying between them enough documentation to fill a filing cabinet, and enough legal authority in the form of Gloria's court-approved preservation order to demand access to any area of the building listed in the original asset inventory. The service door opened with a key card Deshawn still carried. The hallway inside was narrow and fluorescent lit, lined with utility pipes. They moved in single file, Raymond leading his memory of the building's original layout, apparently still intact after 22 years. Sublevel 2 was accessed through a stairwell at the end of the hall. The door to the stairwell had a push bar and a small sign that read, "Authorized personnel only," in letters that had faded to near invisibility. Beneath it, barely readable boiler room sublevel 2. The stairwell was cold. Their footsteps echoed. At the bottom, a short corridor led past the boiler room, large, loud smelling of rust and heat, to a door at the far end that had no sign at all. Just a steel frame, a reinforced lock, and a ventilation grill set high on the wall that was still 22 years later, humming faintly. Vanessa fit the brass key into the lock. It turned on the first try. The vault was exactly as she had left it. Climate-controlled, the air slightly cool and dry, smelling of paper and metal. Steel shelving units ran the length of both walls, each one labeled with date ranges in a filing system that Vanessa had designed herself. Thousands of documents in archival boxes and labeled folders, preserved with the kind of careful attention that only someone who anticipated needing them would apply. Raymond ran his hand along one shelf, reading labels. His jaw was tight. "It's all here," he said. "Everything." Vanessa moved to a specific shelf near the back, the section labeled 1997 to 2001/founding documents/original board records. She opened a box. Inside, in a clear archival sleeve, were the original board meeting minutes from the bank's first 3 years of operation. Every policy decision, every vote, every resolution. She found what she was looking for on the 4th page of the minutes from the board meeting of September 22, 1998. A margin note in her own handwriting in blue ink that had faded slightly to gray. J.C. Remind Board, co-founder, clause statutory requirements. James had been present at that meeting. He had written a note back to her in the margin beside hers, in his rounder, looser hand. Already on it. They don't like it, but they can't change it. Vanessa stared at his handwriting for a long moment. She pressed 2 fingers lightly against the page, not touching the ink directly, just the paper beside it. Then she put the document carefully back in its sleeve and turned to the others. "We have everything we need." The shareholder meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the Crestwood Community Bank Executive Boardroom on the 4th floor. By 9:55, the room was full. Board members in their suits. 2 sets of corporate lawyers with laptops and document bags. A court-appointed mediator at one end of the table. And in the gallery, behind a low dividing rail, a dozen shareholders, small investors from the bank's founding years. Many of them from the original community who had been notified of the meeting through the shareholder communication system that the board had apparently forgotten still included them. In the back row of the gallery sat Jalen, the teenage girl from the lobby. She had come with her mother, who was one of the denied loan applicants in Vanessa's files. She had her phone in her lap, screen down, waiting. Vanessa entered at 10:01. She was wearing a tailored black dress that Iris had driven to her apartment to retrieve that morning. Her posture was the same as it had been in the lobby, straight, unhurried, certain, but the contrast with the worn coat was visible and complete. Every head in the room turned. Iris walked beside her. Gloria came behind, setting her files on the table, with the particular authority of someone who has won before and expects to win again. Bradley was already in the room. He had positioned himself near the window, coffee in hand, working to project the casual confidence of a man on familiar ground. When Vanessa walked in, the coffee cup stilled in his hand. Iris distributed evidence packets to every board member simultaneously. Gloria presented the forensic analysis of the transfer document, Marcus Tate's report, 22 pages, with side-by-side spectrographic analysis of the ink and paper stock. The conclusion was stated plainly on the cover page. The document presented as the co-founder share surrender is inconsistent with materials available in November 2020 and bears multiple indicators of deliberate aging and signature fabrication. Then Deshawn connected his laptop to the room's projection system. The security footage from November 14th, 2020 appeared on the screen. Conference Room B, timestamp 9:44 p.m. The image was grainy but entirely clear. A younger-looking Vanessa sat at the far end of a conference table, her hands in her lap, her eyes unfocused with exhaustion. Patricia Voss stood at the other end, pushing papers across the table. A lawyer Iris didn't recognize stood behind Vanessa's chair. There was no audio, but the body language required no translation. The room was completely silent. Nobody moved. Then Bradley's voice broke the silence, not loud, not composed, but cracked down the middle like something under too much pressure. "She came in looking like that," he said, and the words spilled out before he could stop them, gesturing vaguely in Vanessa's direction. What was I supposed to think? The words landed in the silence of the room like a confession. Jalen raised her phone from her lap. The door at the back of the boardroom opened. 3 individuals in dark suits entered. The woman in front had a federal badge on her belt and steel-gray hair, and the unhurried manner of someone who had been in rooms like this many times. "I'm Special Agent Renee Carter," she said. "Financial Crimes Task Force. We're here pursuant to an ongoing fraud investigation." She looked at Patricia Voss. "Ms. Voss, please don't touch the laptop." Voss went pale. Bradley's coffee cup hit the windowsill and tipped, and nobody moved to catch it. The boardroom did not erupt. It contracted. That was the more accurate word for what happened in the 30 seconds after Special Agent Renee Carter spoke. The room did not fill with noise, it emptied of it. Board members pulled back from the table by inches. Lawyers closed laptops with the careful movements of people suddenly aware that every action was being observed. Patricia Voss stood exactly where she had been standing. One hand resting on a folder, she did not pick up her face the color of old paper. Bradley Hurst had not moved from the window. His coffee had spread in a slow, dark pool across the sill behind him. He was watching Agent Carter, the way a man watches a door he thought was locked swing open on its own. Carter moved through the room efficiently, her 2 colleagues fanning out to either side. She placed a document preservation notice in front of the board secretary, who accepted it with trembling hands. A second agent positioned himself beside the room's main server terminal. A third stood at the door. "We'll need all electronic devices to remain where they are," Carter said, addressing the room without raising her voice. "Documents, laptops, phones. Nothing leaves this floor until our team has completed the initial preservation sweep." She looked at the board's lead counsel. "If you'd like to review the federal order authorizing this, I have copies." The lead counsel, a man named Douglas Fitch, who had spent 30 years making problems disappear for corporate clients, took the offered copy and read it with the expression of someone hoping to find an error and finding none. Gloria Marsh, who had been standing quietly at the far end of the table, allowed herself a small, controlled exhale. Vanessa sat perfectly still. It was Deshawn who spoke next. He was still standing near the projection system, his security uniform carrying a different weight in this room than it had carried in the lobby 48 hours ago. He addressed the board directly, his voice steady. "I want to enter a formal statement into the record," he said. On November 14, 2020, the security archive system for this building logged 23 document scan events between 9:41 and 11:58 p.m. from the conference room B workstation. Mrs. Cole has stated under oath that she signed 2 documents that evening. He paused. "I have the complete metadata log here. The timestamps, the page counts the workstation identification. It's all verified through the off-site backup system which operates independently of the bank's internal network and cannot be retroactively edited." He connected a second file on his laptop. A spreadsheet appeared on the projection screen, rows of timestamps, scan counts, workstation codes. Simple. Undeniable. A junior board member in the third chair leaned forward and studied the screen. He removed his glasses, polished them, put them back on, and looked again. 23 scans, he said quietly to no one in particular. "They were testing the signature," Iris said. She was standing now, her legal pad in hand, her voice carrying the precise measured cadence of someone making an argument before a court. Running copies of Mrs. Cole's signature from documents she had legitimately signed previously until they produced a version that could be embedded in the transfer document, convincingly enough to survive casual scrutiny. The forensic analysis confirms the signature on the transfer document does not match Mrs. Cole's verified exemplars in 7 distinct characteristics. She set Marcus Tate's report on the table and slid it toward the board secretary. Page 14. The comparison is visual and immediately apparent. Douglas Fitch had stopped pretending to read his copy of the federal order. Agent Carter crossed to where Patricia Voss was standing. "Ms. Voss, I'd like you to come with me, please." Voss looked at her lawyer. Her lawyer looked at Carter. Neither of them said anything useful. "Ms. Voss," Carter repeated. Voss moved. As she passed the projection screen, the footage still playing on loop, the conference room scene from 2020, her own figure caught in grainy surveillance light, pushing papers across a table toward an exhausted and grieving woman. She did not look at it. She kept her eyes forward and her chin level and walked out of the boardroom with the rigid composure of someone who had spent 61 years maintaining appearances and was not going to stop now. Bradley watched her go. Something in his face changed when the door closed behind her. Not remorse. Not fear exactly. Something more like the specific vertigo of a person who has built their sense of security entirely on proximity to power and has just watched the power leave the room. He turned back to the window. The coffee had dripped off the sill onto the carpet. He looked at it for a moment, as though the stain were a problem he could still manage. Agent Carter's third colleague approached him. "Mr. Hurst, we have some questions." In the gallery, Donna Reese, 71 years old, a retired school teacher who had lived in the same house on Caldwell Street for 38 years and had received her 3rd foreclosure notice 6 days ago, sat with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes fixed on Vanessa. She had come because a neighbor had told her about the meeting. She had not expected to understand everything she saw, but she understood enough. She understood that the woman sitting at that table had built something that had been taken from her and had spent 4 years in silence building the means to take it back. She understood that the folder Iris had placed in front of every board member included her name, her loan application, her denial letter, her credit score 741 beside her zip code. She understood that she had not been failed by accident. Jalen in the back row beside Donna had been recording since the moment Agent Carter walked in. The live stream counter in the corner of her screen read 14,000 viewers and climbing. At the table, Vanessa remained seated as the room reorganized itself around the federal agent's work. Board members conferred in low voices with lawyers. The court mediator made careful notes. Gloria moved efficiently between the table and the gallery, collecting signed shareholder statements. At one point, a board member named Gerald Haynes, older quiet, who had said almost nothing during the meeting, came and stood beside Vanessa's chair. "I voted against the 2020 restructuring," he said, his voice low. "I raised concerns about the process, and then I stayed silent about what I knew." He looked at the table. "I've thought about that a great deal over the past 3 years." Vanessa looked up at him. "Then don't be silent now," she said. He nodded once, went back to his seat. And when Agent Carter's colleague came to take his statement, Gerald Haynes did not reach for his lawyer's card. He simply began to talk. By noon, the 4th floor of Crestwood Community Bank looked less like a boardroom and more like a crime scene that had been asked to keep its composure. Federal agents moved between workstations with document preservation bags. The court mediator had filled 4 legal pads. 2 board members had requested and received permission to call their personal attorneys, who arrived within the hour, read the federal order, and advised their clients in low, urgent voices to cooperate fully. Patricia Voss had been escorted to a conference room on the 3rd floor, where Agent Carter conducted a recorded interview that lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. Voss arrived with her attorney and left the same way, but the quality of her silence had changed between entry and exit. It had gone from controlled to careful, which in Gloria's experience was the silence of someone calculating exposure rather than maintaining innocence. Bradley Hearst was questioned in the bank's own manager's office, which had the particular irony of being the room from which he had operated for 2 years, making decisions about which families stayed in their homes and which ones didn't. He sat behind his own desk with an agent across from him and a digital recorder between them, and answered questions about incentive structures and performance metrics and the loan denial protocols he had implemented in the Southern District. His lawyer interrupted frequently. The answers he gave were the kind designed to create distance between a man and his own decisions. He had followed policy, he had implemented directives, he had not designed the system, he had simply operated within it. The recording captured all of it. In the boardroom, the shareholder meeting had technically resumed under the mediator's supervision, though its character had transformed entirely. The agenda items prepared by the bank's legal team: dismissal of Vanessa's claims, ratification of the 2020 restructuring, approval of the current board's continued authority, had been quietly set aside. In their place, Gloria Marsh had introduced 3 motions. The first was an emergency resolution to establish an independent audit committee with subpoena authority over all lending records from 2018 to the present. It passed 6 votes to 2 with 3 abstentions. The second was a resolution to suspend all pending foreclosure proceedings in the 4 identified zip codes pending the audit's completion. It passed 7-1 with 2 abstentions. The one dissenting vote was Douglas Fitch, who was technically present as legal counsel, and whose vote the mediator later ruled non-binding. The third motion was the one that mattered most. Gloria stood when she introduced it. She did not use notes. Under Section 4, Paragraph 2 of the original founding charter of Crestwood Community Bank, she said, "Co-founder rights that were purportedly transferred through a document now under federal investigation for fraud are hereby reinstated pending final judicial determination." Mrs. Vanessa Cole, standing as co-founder, is recognized by this body, effective immediately, with all attendant rights, including voting authority, access to records, and participation in governance decisions. The vote was 8-0. Gerald Haynes voted yes without hesitation. 2 board members who had spent the morning in visible discomfort voted yes with the particular relief of people finally permitted to do what their conscience had been demanding. Even one of the lawyers voted yes, though his client shot him a look that he absorbed without expression. When the result was announced, The gallery was silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then Donna Reese began to clap. Slowly at first, then steadily. Jalen joined her. Then the woman beside Jalen. Then the rest of the gallery one by one until the sound filled the boardroom the way applause fills a space when it is not performed, but felt. Vanessa did not stand. She sat at the table, her hands folded in front of her, and let the sound wash over her. Her eyes were dry. Her face was composed. But anyone watching closely enough, and Iris sitting 2 seats to her right was watching that closely, could see the slight movement at the corner of her jaw that meant she was holding something in. Iris reached across and put her hand over her mother's. Vanessa turned her palm upward and held on. At the window where Bradley had been standing since the meeting resumed, he was no longer there. He had been escorted from the room by one of Carter's colleagues 40 minutes earlier, after an email surfaced during the archive sweep, sent from his work account at 6:47 a.m. the morning after the lobby incident, that contained a single line directed to the bank's document management vendor. Proceed with scheduled purge. Priority items flagged. Don't wait for sign-off. The email had been sent before the bank opened, before most of his staff arrived, before he had presumably assumed anyone with the technical access to stop it would be in a position to do so. Deshawn had been in a position to do so. He had flagged the purge attempt to Gloria's team at 7:03 a.m. 17 minutes after the email was sent, and a court injunction had been in place by 8:30. Not a single document was destroyed. Jalen's live stream had reached 340,000 viewers by the time the third motion passed. The comments were moving too fast to read individually, but the tenor was visible in the scroll shock recognition fury, and then as the votes came through, something that looked like relief. People typing in all capitals, people tagging friends, people saying I knew it, and finally, and her name was on that building the whole time. In the back row, Donna Reese had stopped clapping. She sat with her hands in her lap, and her eyes on Vanessa, and the expression on her face was not triumphant. It was exhausted and grateful, and very, very old, the expression of a woman who had lived long enough to stop expecting justice and was therefore entirely undone by its arrival. The mediator called the meeting to a formal close at 1:47 p.m. As people began to gather their things, Agent Carter approached Vanessa one final time. "We'll need a formal statement from you in the coming days," she said, "and we may need access to the vault materials for the federal case." "Everything in that vault is available to you," Vanessa said. "It always was. No one ever thought to look." Carter studied her for a moment. Then she said simply, "I'm sorry it took this long." Vanessa looked at her. "It took exactly as long as it needed to." Carter nodded once and moved on. Iris gathered their files. Gloria was already on her phone scheduling the next set of filings. Raymond was talking quietly with Gerald Haynes near the door. Deshawn stood near the projector, still in his security uniform, watching the room empty, with the expression of a man who has carried something heavy for a long time and has only just set it down. Vanessa stood, smoothed her dress, picked up her bag, not the plastic bag from 2 days ago, but a proper leather case that Iris had brought along with the black dress that morning. She looked around the boardroom one final time. The federal agents, the open laptops, the evidence packets still spread across the table, the projection screen now dark. Then she walked out. The foreclosure notice on Donna Reese's front door came down on a Thursday afternoon, 11 days after the shareholder meeting. A representative from the bank's newly appointed interim restitution team removed it personally, not a process server, not a contractor, but a young woman named Claire who had joined the bank 2 months ago, believing it was a community institution, and had spent the intervening weeks trying to reconcile that belief with what she was being asked to do. She removed the notice carefully, up to cone, taking out each staple individually rather than tearing the paper, as though the act of removal deserved a certain deliberateness. Donna watched from her front window. When Claire finished and looked up, Donna raised one hand in acknowledgement. Claire nodded, walked back to her car, sat for a moment before starting the engine. The $40 million restitution fund was formally established 19 days after the meeting, following a consent agreement between the bank's interim board and the Federal Financial Crimes Task Force. Its mandate covered wrongful loan denials, predatory foreclosure proceedings, and equity losses sustained by borrowers in the 4 identified zip codes between 2018 and the present. An independent administrator was appointed. A community advisory panel with actual authority, as Vanessa had specified, not decorative presence, was formed with 7 members, 5 of whom lived in the affected neighborhoods. Donna Reese received a letter from the fund administrator in the 4th week. Her loan was restructured at the rate she had originally qualified for. Her $4,200 in application fees were refunded. A supplemental payment addressed the equity differential between the terms she had been offered and the terms a borrower with her profile in a different zip code would have received. The letter was 2 pages long and written in plain language without euphemism. She read it 3 times at her kitchen table. Then she called her sister in Atlanta and told her she didn't need the spare room after all. Patricia Voss was charged with securities fraud conspiracy to commit financial discrimination and document falsification. Her attorney entered a not guilty plea. Bail was set at $500,000, which she posted within 48 hours, which told you something about the distance between her circumstances and the circumstances of the people her institution had targeted. The federal case was expected to take 18 months to reach trial. Gloria Marsh intended to be in that courtroom. Bradley Hearst's banking license was suspended pending the outcome of the federal investigation. His employment at Crestwood was terminated the day after the boardroom meeting, effective immediately with a termination letter that cited conduct unbecoming a fiduciary representative and a list of specific incidents that his HR file had somehow never previously recorded. He left the building with a cardboard box and without the Italian loafers, which, in a detail that a court clerk later mentioned to a colleague, who mentioned it to someone who mentioned it to Jalen, who posted it online, he had apparently left under his desk when he was escorted out, as though he had expected to come back for them. He did not come back. Deshaun Porter's new title was Community Ethics Officer. His appointment was announced internally on a Monday morning in a staff email from the interim board chair, with a paragraph describing his role: independent reporting authority, direct access to the audit committee, protected status against retaliation, that had been written at Vanessa's insistence, with enough legal specificity to be enforceable. His mother's health insurance remained intact. His car payment was no longer late. Amara, his daughter, read the email over his shoulder at the breakfast table and said simply, "That's you, Dad." He didn't trust himself to answer. Jalen's video of the shareholder meeting reached 2.1 million views. She was profiled in a local news segment as the teenager who live-streamed a reckoning. She was 17 years old and embarrassed by the attention in the specific way that teenagers are embarrassed by things that matter to them. 2 weeks after the meeting, a letter arrived from the Restitution Fund's Community Scholarship Program. Full tuition. She could study anything she wanted. She already knew. Marine biology. Tanya Mills remained at her teller position. The morning after the boardroom meeting, she arrived at work 30 minutes early and sat in her car in the parking lot, looking at the building for 22 of those minutes. When she finally walked in, she went directly to the interim branch manager's office and asked to submit a statement, her own account of the lobby incident, the laughing she had done, and immediately regretted the things she had seen over 2 years of working the teller line and said nothing about. The statement was 4 pages long. She cried once in the middle of the second page and then kept writing. On the day the restitution fund was formally announced, Vanessa returned to the original branch on Del Mar Boulevard. She was wearing the same black dress. She had her leather case. She walked through the glass doors at 10:14 in the morning, the same time she realized as the morning. Everything began and took her place in the line that wound from the teller windows back toward the entrance. The lobby looked different. Small things mostly. The mission statement had been reframed the same words, but mounted lower at eye level, where you could actually read them without craning your neck. The chrome fixtures at the teller counter had been replaced with something warmer. Through the window that faced the street, the cornerstone was clearly visible: J and V. Cole. When Vanessa reached the front of the line, Tanya Mills looked up. The recognition was immediate. The discomfort was immediate too. It moved across Tanya's face honestly, without the management of someone trying to hide it. She didn't look away. "Mrs. Cole," she said. Her voice was steady but only just. "I owe you an apology. Not a policy apology. A real one." She paused. "I laughed, and I knew better. And I said nothing for 2 years about things I should have said something about. I'm sorry." Vanessa studied her for a moment. "Silence is a choice," she said. "Make a different one next time." Tanya nodded. Opened the new account drawer. Placed the form on the counter. Vanessa reached into her coat pocket. She produced a crisp whole $10 bill. Unfolded it once. Smoothed it flat with one hand. Bradley Hurst had torn one of these in half in front of a lobby full of people, dropping the pieces at her feet like something worthless. This one she placed on the counter herself, evenly, without hurry. It landed the way things land, when they have been a long time coming, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a kind of finality that everyone nearby could feel without being able to say exactly why. Tanya processed the account with careful attention. When she slid the receipt and temporary card across the counter, her hands were steady. "Welcome to Crestwood Community Bank," she said. And then quieter, with the weight of someone who understood exactly what the words meant now: "Welcome back." Vanessa picked up the receipt, looked at it once, then looked up past the teller window, past the reframed mission statement, through the front glass to the cornerstone outside. J and V. Cole. She thought of James, his handwriting in the margins of a 27-year-old document, his voice on a Sunday morning in a kitchen that no longer existed, his note beside hers in the vault in the dark, preserved through everything already on it. They don't like it, but they can't change it. She walked out into the morning. The sun was high and the street was loud, and the city moved forward the way cities always do, indifferent and relentless. But on the cornerstone behind her, the names held. They had always held. Dignity is not something that can be torn in half and dropped at your feet. It is not diminished by a worn coat, a plastic bag, or a lobby full of people looking the other way. What happened to Vanessa Cole is a reminder that the most dangerous person in any room is the one who has been quietly building the truth, while everyone else assumed she had nothing left. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from and what part hit hardest. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is your sign. The next story is already waiting for you.